What's going on, gamers? Today we're going to be jumping into a bit more Diablo 4, and what I'm going to be bringing you today is going to be a build guide for the Barbarian that should be a lot of fun to play in the new season and can easily carry you up to around about Nightmare Dungeon 60 with the possibility of going a bit higher if you want to spec a bit more into defense. But if that interests you, then stay tuned. That's coming up next. Welcome back everybody. Today we're going to be playing the Barbarian class. After looking at the patch notes that absolutely destroyed pretty much everything I was doing with every one of my builds, I decided to have a little bit of fun, do a hybrid build and put something together that I actually am really enjoying playing. We've now got a little bit of bleed going on, a little bit of thorns, and we're able to group things up and do a nice bit of damage if we need to clear a lot of targets, or of course if we need to do a big single hit on the boss. Now as always, what I'm going to do, I'm going to chuck on a little bit of footage, show you what this build's all about, then from there you can decide if this is the one for you. Afterwards, I'll crack on with the full build guide. Right, so kicking it off with our skill tree, and pretty much every single Thorns build should start off with Flay. Flay is the best in slot for Thorns, it's going to help you out massively, and you're going to spec all the way down into here, in which it's going to give you a massive amount of Thorns, stacking 4 times. So if you do manage to put a bit more damage reduction in your build, you may want to swap into this a little bit later on. However, for the moment, just for ease and to make my life a whole bunch safer, I've gone with Frenzy. This helps us to generate a little bit of additional fury, I found, and also it's a little bit of a safer in slot. Frenzy is a very fast attack, its speed is increased by 20%, stacking 3 times, so you're going to be able to do 60% extra speed, and jumping over to its enhanced node, whilst Frenzy is granting that 60%, it's also going to give you 2 additional fury, which is very nice for this build. Lastly, the main reason I'm picking this, like I said, a little bit of safety, Combat Frenzy, you gain 8% damage reduction for each stack of Frenzy that you currently have. Moving down to our core skills, and it's going to be all about Hammer of the Ancients, or HOTA as it's known. This is going to be one of the most unpopular picks at the moment because it has just received a massive nerf. However, I still really enjoy playing with this, and it seems to fit really well with this build. We've stacked it up to 9 times, you're definitely going to want to get as much as you can with this, because it does do a significant amount of damage the more you put in with your ranks. If we manage to go over to our Enhanced Hammer of the Ancients, now you're going to gain 3% more fury for 5 seconds for each enemy damaged by Hammer of the Ancients, stacking up to 10 times. But the main reason you'll be using this will be Furious Hammer of the Ancients. Hammer of the Ancients now deals 1% additional damage for each point of fury you have when you're using it. With this build, what you're going to be doing, you're going to be going in with your standard attacks, the thorn damage is going to be taking out all of the little minions, you're going to be able to do a lot of damage without actually trying, and then once all of your fury's built all the way up to the top, then you're going to slam your hammer down, allowing you to get an absolutely massive hit off. Like I said, millions of points of damage depending on what you've got going on in your build. Jumping down to our defensive tree, and I find that grabbing this as soon as possible really helps you out. Imposing Presence is going to give you 15% additional maximum life when you chuck 3 points into it. Ideally, I would have loved to have been able to put a little bit more into this. If you find yourself squishy, take some out of your attack, chuck it into martial vigour, as it's going to mean you'll be able to get 3, 6 or 9% damage reduction against the elites. However, we have picked up Rallying Cry. I tried my hardest to get this out of the build. I wanted to have less shouts. You can't really do it in a Thorns build, you have to have this, and pretty much 9 all Barbarian builds, unfortunately you have to have this on because it's just so vital. Rallying Cry is going to be our big source of fury, and it's also going to give us Unstoppable, which as you know is vital. We've got a lot of Unstoppable going on in this build, so I'm absolutely tired of crowd control. Down from here, and we've also got Strategic Rallying Cry. Rallying Cry is also now going to give us Fortify, allowing us to get a lot of Fortify because we're also going to get 2% base life as Fortify each time we take or deal direct damage. We're in amongst everything, we're getting hit in the face, we're hitting them in the face. This is going to be our main way of grabbing Fortify. Just down from here, one of my favourite things for the Barbarian is going to be the Iron Skin. We've got quite a few into this, and it's on a nice cooldown of 12.56 seconds, so we're able to generate it very often. This is going to give us a barrier that absorbs 70% of your missing life for 5 seconds. Jumping down to its additional node, Iron Skin's barrier also absorbs 51% more of your maximum life, and we've got quite a higher maximum life, so this one works out ideal. Down from here again, while Iron Skin is active, heal for 10% of the barrier's original amount as life per second. This might not sound like much, but it pretty much gives you full health very fast, and is probably the best heal we've got as a Barbarian class. Just down from here, Outburst, we're going to chuck 1 into that, and we're going to chuck 3 into Tough as Nails, increasing our Thorns, and they take an additional amount of your Thorns as bleeding damage over 5 seconds. The bleeding damage, to be fair, isn't the most amount ever, but it does definitely help you out with what we've got going on that build. Challenging Shout, pretty much your I don't want to fall over. This is going to allow you to get a nice bit of damage reduction. We've only got 1 point into this, but it still gives you damage reduction of 42% as standard. Going on to its enhanced, while Challenging Shout is active, you're going to gain 20% bonus maximum life. And finally, Strategic Challenging Shout. Now we're also able to get 30% of our maximum life is going to equal the same amount into Thorns. Over to our Brawling skills, and we're bopping all the way over to Booming Voice. We want our shout skills up as long as possible. 3 points into this is really going to help you out. Healing, healing, healing. Raid Leader, your shouts also heal allies for 3% of their maximum life, and this affects you, so you're getting heals every time you're using your shouts. Guttural Yell, this just helps you to take a little bit of damage away from those enemies. Your shout skills cause enemies to deal 8% less damage for 5 seconds. Over to Aggressive Resistance, gain 9% damage reduction whilst you're berserking. We're berserking very often, well worth having on. Anytime you can grab some damage reduction in your build, it's definitely worth picking up. Down to our Weapon Mastery tree, and we've got Pit Fighter. We're now going to deal 9% increased damage to close enemies and gain 6% damage reduction as standard. Over from here, and No Mercy means we have 9% increased critical strike chance against immobilized, stunned or slowed enemies. One that has recently received a nerf, which is a bit of a pain, but we are still going to be picking it up because you need it, and that's going to be Hamstring. Your bleeding effects slow healthy enemies by 20%. Before, it just slowed everything, so it didn't matter about how much health they had on. Now, when they go below 80%, they're not going to take that effect, unfortunately, but most time with this build, gather them all up, hit them early with your hammer, and then they're still healthy when you get that big hit. Steel Grasp, just an amazing skill to use. This one is going to bunch everything up. You're going to use it to grab your enemies. You're going to use it to apply this right here, which is vulnerable. It's boosted now to 3 seconds from 2.5, I believe. It's probably one of the best ways to apply vulnerable for our Barbarian class overall. Also, just up from here, if Steel Grasp damages an enemy, gain Berserk for 2 seconds, so we're berserking very often as well. Thick Skin is going to mean that we get a little bit of additional Fortify. Put as much as you can into this. If you want to spec a couple of points out in order to put them somewhere else, that's not a problem. You definitely want to put at least 1 in, so that you can get a little bit of defensive stance. And just over here, so that whilst you're fortified over 50% of your maximum life, you're going to deal 12% increased damage. Going over to our ultimates, we have not picked up an ultimate whatsoever, but we have picked up a little bit of heavy-handed just from one of the items we've currently got on our gear. This is actually really good. It means you're going to do a nice bit of extra damage, and the more you can stack into this, it's well worth doing. But you will want to invest points yourself into this one, and that's going to be Wallop. Your skills using bludgeoning weapons deal 15% increased damage if the enemy is stunned or vulnerable. Lastly, for your key passive, I found you've pretty much got to put this on. Unbridled Rage your core skills are going to deal 135% increased damage but cost 100% more fury. We're not able to completely spam our hammer, but we are making it so that our first hit does a ridiculous amount of damage, and if we need to get a second one off we can do that as well before going back into our basic and knocking everything around with the thorns. Now jumping over to the gear, and just quickly you can see that he's got quite a nice bit of attack power, although most times I wouldn't judge a build on that because it's quite hard to judge with attack power. Armour over 7,000, you're probably always going to want over that, especially now as we've had a slight nerf to every build with how much armour they're getting from one of the aspects. Life, I've tried to make sure he's got a big bit of life so that even though you've got a bit of mitigation going, you've also got a bit of health to back it up with just in case things hit the fan. Now with the pieces of gear, I'm going to be telling you exactly what I've got on. You can modify these, adjust them to your will, and you'll definitely be able to make stronger ones than what I've got, as I've got good stats on mine, but I'd say I've got far from perfect. So I'll put some affixes over on the left hand side I think you should watch out for. But for the headpiece, we've got armour, all stats, maximum life and cooldown. Cooldown I'd say is probably the one that's 100% needed, but maximum life is also very nice. Whenever you can get armour, try to chuck it on your gear because it's just going to make your life a whole bunch easier. I've imprinted the aspect of disobedience on this one. You're going to gain 0.50 armour for 4 seconds when you deal any form of damage. Now this stacks up to 30%, it was 50%, so we have had a bit of a nerf to this, but it's still probably one of the strongest ones in the game for helping you to survive that damage. Jumping over to the chest armour, and I've just realised I didn't even upgrade or chuck in the last gem for this equipment, so like I said, you'll definitely be able to do well in your nightmare dungeons, especially if you're min-maxing the build, because this one is far from it. But what we've tried to do, we've put a bit of thorns on this, iron skin, I really like iron skin in this build, damage reduction from close enemies, and barrier generation. If you didn't want that barrier generation, then a few of the other ones you could put on will be listed on the left hand side that will also be amazing in this build. The aspect is going to be the adventurous aspect, gaining 4% damage reduction for each nearby bleeding enemy, which is going to be up to 20% maximum. This is a good one, but ultimately if you can, I'd say probably imprint it with this one instead, which is going to be the aspect of might. Just here, your basic skills grant 20% damage reduction for 6 seconds. You're going to be doing a lot of basic attacks before you go in with your core ability, so this one will probably work out best in that slot if you can chuck it on. For your gauntlets, one thing that you're definitely going to want, you're going to want as many ranks of Hammer of the Ancients as you can possibly get, as well as your critical strike chance being as high as possible. Other than that, if you can get some strength, that's really nice, and I've got all stats just to make sure our build rounded out well, but if you wanted something else in that place, you could definitely put it in there. For that aspect, we've gone with the Death Wish one, and this is going to give us a set amount of thorns whilst we're berserking, allowing us to get a bit of damage about ourselves that way. Going over to the pants, and we're going to be using the aspect of the Iron Warrior in this. It's really going to help you out. You're going to be using iron skin very often, and now you're going to have Unstoppable and have 24% damage reduction whenever you're pressing it. Really going to help you out in those tricky situations, and anytime you can get another Unstoppable, it's going to make things a lot easier for yourself. The stats you're going to be looking for will be total armor, strength, damage reduction from close enemies, and maximum life. Now over to the boots. One thing I found that I definitely needed on my boots, make sure you get 2 max evade charges. Being able to evade what seemed like a funny little mechanic at the start of the game is actually very much needed later on. That and the movement speed are 2 you're definitely going to want. Other than that, damage reduction whilst injured does help you out if you want a bit of survivability for those tricky situations, but out of all of them, the damage reduction whilst injured would probably be the one that you could toggle off. Other than that, I've got strength, and a much needed one that you'll definitely want is going to be Fury cost reduction. Fury cost reduction is going to be how we're able to swing our hammer a few times rather than just the once, because our keystone passive makes things very expensive. Next up for our hammer, we've gone with strength, as that's always going to help you out. It's going to factor straight into your skill damage, so racking up your strength can really make a difference. Critical strike damage, all stats and vulnerable damage are also very good on this weapon. If you want to swap one out, you may be able to get away with taking off the all stats, but it all depends how you're going down your Paragon board if you need the extra stats in order to make things work with some of those rare nodes. We've gone with the conceited aspect. You can now deal up to, if you've got a perfect roll, 50% increased damage whilst you have a barrier active. With all of your weapons, I found by far and best, if you can, chuck all of the green flawless gems on it. That's going to give you a little bit of extra damage whenever you're hitting those targets that are vulnerable, which most times things pretty much are going to be. Over from here, and we've got vulnerable damage, core skill damage, strength, and damage to close. All of these are really good, and damage to close is going to round things off a little bit, because obviously we're going to be hitting things close with our thorns. But if you did want to swap one of these out, and you had a perfect roll, you'd probably be aiming for that crit damage instead of the core skill damage. The aspect we're using is that of the expectant. Attacking enemies with a basic skill increases the damage of your next core skill cast by a certain amount, up to 10%, and it goes all the way up to and it stacks all the way up to 30%. For the next single hander, and as you can see we're using two swords because they're both going to give us a nice bit of critical strike damage. We've gotten this, vulnerable damage, damage to close, and critical strike damage again. The imprinting for the aspect is going to be inner calm, deal a set amount of damage each second you stand still, up to 30%. I found a lot of times I was bringing things towards myself with my steel grasp, then standing around for 1 or 2 seconds doing some basic attacks, then going into my overhand with my Hammer of the Ancient and doing some massive damage, so this one worked out perfect. For the last weapon, we've gone over to our two-hander. We're using a sword again for the extra critical damage, critical strike damage again, damage to close, strength, and vulnerable damage. Ultimately, I'd say that is probably roundabout perfect for the affixes on it, and the aspect is going to be limitless rage. Each point of fury you generate whilst at maximum fury grants your next core skill 4%, so we've got to max that one, increase damage up to 60%. Meaning you're going to stand there, you're going to make sure you're hacking away with your basic, then you're going to leave it a little while just to make sure you get that extra damage accrued, and then you're going to swing down your hammer, giving you that massive effect. Before I was using stun was the best in slot by a mile. Now they gave it a big old nerf, so we're going to go with this one. Over to the amulet, and with this one we've got 2 ranks of heavy handed passive, which really helps you out with your hammer skill, 629 thorns, fury cost reduction, and the last one we've got damage of nearly 9%. If I could, I'd probably swap out that last one. You would want cooldown instead, that would be ideal. But ultimately this one is probably far from perfect, so put on stats to your liking here. Thorns helps you out a little bit, but it doesn't have to be in here. The only ones that does is going to be fury cost reduction, and like I said, if you can, cooldown reduction. And the aspect that we're going to be using is also going to be that of the protector. Damaging an enemy grants you a barrier absorbing up to 8,000 damage for 10 seconds. This can only happen every 30 seconds, but now we've got 2 barriers going on. We've got this one, plus we've got the one that we're able to generate when we're using our iron skin, and like you saw, we've also got a lot of extra damage coming from whenever we've got a barrier, so this works out perfect. Over to our ring, and we've got critical strike damage, maximum life, vulnerable damage, and resource generation. Whenever you can get critical strike damage and vulnerable on your rings, it's really going to help you out. I am missing a crit chance here, which you might want to swap in or swap out depending on your playstyle. Maybe you could replace it where the resource generation is, but this ring's still pretty nice. The aspect, we're going to be going with the needle flare. Thorns damage dealt has a 40% chance to deal damage to all enemies around you. So now when enemies are hitting us, they're pretty much taking the brunt of it, as well as their friends as well, giving us a nice little AoE effect going on. And lastly, Bold Chieftain's Loop. This one's going to be the ring we're using in order to kind of maintain our shats with the aspect. We've got crit strike chance, crit strike damage, maximum life, and vulnerable damage. Pretty much a perfect ring. The affixes on it are very good. They're not the highest rolls unfortunately, but they will be really good if you can get something similar to that. The Chieftain's aspect is also one of the best ones for Barbarian. Whenever you cast a skill, its cooldown is reduced by up to a set amount. Hopefully you'll get close to 1.9 seconds per enemy, up to a maximum of 6 seconds taken off of those chat skills. For the expertise, I found the two-handed axe one is definitely best. We're not going to benefit from the second part, but we are going to be able to get increased damage to vulnerable enemies by 15%. So a nice little hefty chunk of damage just from having this one on. So lastly, we're going to jump straight over to the Paragon board. I'm going to try and keep this one short and sweet because I've just seen how long this video has taken. But for the first grid, you're going to want to go exactly as I show you here, and I have missed off this one. You do not have to collect this one, but if you do want to put into this one, then just remember that we've got 4 renown points that I haven't collected yet. So if you use 2, you'll be able to pick this one up as well. But I found putting this one in works best. Chuck in your exploit glyph in the first one, and make sure you've got enough dexterity in order to activate the second additional bonus. When an enemy is damaged by you, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. This has to be in almost every kind of barbarian build, this glyph, because it's just so good for giving you that vulnerable, and it's going to give you a bit of vulnerable damage as well, making you a lot stronger in your build. Jumping up from here, I always want to say Warbringer. We're going to be using the Warbinger Paragon board, and again it's going to look exactly like that if you do need to copy it exactly. If you've got it like this, it's going to allow you to pick up all of these tasty nodes here, giving you a lot of physical damage. The glyph that you're going to want to put in is going to be the territorial glyph, which is absolutely amazing, gives you a lot of close range damage and also gives you 10% damage reduction against close enemies. The whole barbarian build is close range, so this one works out ideal. Then I've made my way around, gone up to here, picked up a nice bit of fury, grabbed myself a little bit of additional damage while fortified, and then gone all the way down and picked up the legendary node Warbinger. For every 75 fury you spend, you gain 12% of your maximum life. This one is nice, I must admit. I've put it on because it definitely helped me to generate a bit of fury, but ultimately it's not going to be 100% essential. So if you wanted to take this out and you wanted to spend some points somewhere else, you very well could do, because you're only going to be reaping the benefits of this when we start using our Hammer of the Ancients. I like having this on, but if you don't want it, you can spec all of these points somewhere else. Moving on to the next board, and we're going into the Weapon Master board. This one's really nice and easy to do. As you can see, we haven't spent too much in here, but we've picked up everything we needed. We've managed to go all the way along here in order to pick up a bit of physical again. We've also got a little bit of attack speed. Just up from here, we've managed to grab some armor and some strength, as well as give ourselves a little bit of extra berserking, because we're going to be using this glyph right here, which is going to be, whilst berserking, you take 10% reduced damage from elites, and you're going to do additional damage when you are berserking. Pick up the raw power and go round to here in order to grab a lot of elite damage. Then you're going to make your way straight up. Now with this one, I've actually only used 5 boards with this build. I found that worked pretty well, but I've made it so that if you wanted to go on and use 6, you very well could do. So what we've done, we've bopped up here, and the glyph that you're going to be putting in is going to be the Revenge glyph. This one means dealing Thorns damage to an enemy increases all the damage it takes from you by 1% up to 8% for 10 seconds. You've got Thorns on constantly, everything's going to get hit, it's like a guaranteed little bit of extra damage, and I found it really nice because it's going to increase our vulnerable reduction just over here from our magic glyphs, as well as give us a little bit of vulnerable damage from over here whenever we start increasing this glyph. Make your way around, you're going to want to pick these up as well. Vulnerable is just too good to pass up, and then you're going to want to come up here and grab this rare node as well, because it's going to give you a nice bit of physical damage as well as some maximum health. Now like I said, I'm only using 5 boards, so I just spec'd this way, went straight down, and at this point what you're going to do is you're going to need to use those Paragon points that I actually haven't got at the moment, and you'll be able to pop down here and pick up the extra 20% damage with two-handed bludgeoning weapons, and of course because it's a strength one, you'll be able to make sure you grab another 10% extra damage with two-handed bludgeoning weapons again. Jumping over to your glyph, you're going to want to make sure that you put this one in. This one is going to be so good for this build because you're going to go from your basic into your hammer, and it means you're going to get a massive amount of damage on that first attack. Mortal Draw, for every 5 dexterity purchase within range, skills that swap to a different weapon deal 16.5% increased damage. Swapping weapons has an 18% chance to cause the skills damage to critically strike. Knight, on most times you'll be getting a crit damage strike, so boost your crit damage as much as possible, watch those HOTA numbers fly, and even though it might not be as much as pre-nerf, it's still a fun thing to see when a lot of your enemies are grouped up. Another rare node to grab is going to be 10% damage reduction whilst healthy, and then move all the way around here and you'll be able to pick up the maximum life and a little bit more armor, as well as the bonus maximum life because it's based on strength. Like I said, if you did want another board over here, you'll probably have to take a bit out of this board, so you probably take a bit out of here, or just choose what you want to take out in order to go over to this way and grab another board. but if you do that, you will need a bit more willpower, you will need a bit more dexterity in order to make sure you're grabbing up those rare nodes. Right, you gamers, hopefully that's helped a few of you guys and girls out. I actually think this is quite a nice little fun build and should work very well with this season, because it's going to be quite survivable. It's going to be tanky enough to do a lot of damage with your thorns, which I forgot to mention. Try and make sure you've got over 4,000 thorns. You're definitely going to want that. But yeah, nice survivability, nice bit of thorns, a little bit of bleed going on, as well as some two-handed damage that's going on with your Hammer of the Ancients. As always, there'll be a lot more gaming from me. For now, take care. I'll see you on the next day.